air, it's literally taking money out of my pocket.
Right.
So I got my own personal feelings about that because it personally affects me.
When Malcolm-Jamal Warner passed away in Costa Rica on July 21st, 2025, Hollywood expected a standard public funeral, one where celebrities could show face, shed a tear, and move on. But that's not what happened. His wife made a shocking decision.
I cannot listen to anymore because I love J. Cole. But I had to stop listening to J. Cole because I got tired of hearing, and
they were tired of me fighting with the writers about their writing. And then they were tired of Eddie's shenanigans.
Which is mean?
Whatever. I mean, Eddie is a nut. And I mean that in
I imagine the brothers showing up late, the brothers showing
all
up
of that.
Whatever. And you're like, I'm on time.
Right. It was a miserable experience.
The funeral would be private, and the guest list would say everything about the real Malcolm and the real story of his complicated, often painful, career. This wasn't just about grief. It was about boundaries, legacy, and protecting someone who had spent his life being punished for telling the truth. Malcolm had never played the Hollywood game the way they wanted him to. Even at the height of his fame, he wasn't afraid to say things that made powerful people uncomfortable, even when it cost him millions. After The Cosby Show was pulled from syndication, Malcolm was brutally honest about the impact. "This show was taken off the air. It's literally taking money out of my pocket," he said. That wasn't bitterness, that was clarity. Malcolm knew exactly how the industry worked and how it punished those who didn't fall in line. Throughout his life, Malcolm had made powerful enemies, not through scandal, not through arrogance, but by speaking up, pushing back, and standing firm when everyone else played along. Now in death, his family was making sure the same industry that ignored him while he lived wouldn't exploit his memory. And that started with who would and wouldn't be allowed to attend his funeral. From the outside, some names might seem like obvious guests, longtime collaborators, fellow actors, even past friends. But Malcolm's story was full of complicated relationships. Some of those people weren't just absent in his life, they were directly responsible for some of his biggest professional losses. Take Eddie Griffin. In 1996, Malcolm thought he was getting his big comeback. After The Cosby Show, he'd struggled to find mature adult roles that matched the success of Theo Huxtable. Then UPN offered him Malcolm and Eddie, a sitcom that would make him a star in his own right. He was finally in charge, finally the lead, but UPN paired him with Eddie Griffin, and that changed everything. At first, they both had a shared goal: make it to 100 episodes. That number was the magic threshold once a show hit 100. It qualified for syndication, which meant millions in long-term income. They said it openly: "We're going to get this money. We're going to get this 100 episodes." But things unraveled fast. Griffin was chaotic. He showed up late. He was unprepared. He clashed with the crew. Meanwhile, Malcolm was fighting writers about authentic Black representation. He wasn't trying to cause drama, he just wanted the show to reflect real lives, not tired stereotypes. The executives had a choice: keep fighting with 2 stars or pull the plug. They canceled the show at 88 episodes, 12 short of syndication. Both men lost millions, but Malcolm lost more than money. He lost faith. That experience taught him something painful but necessary. Some collaborators cost more than they're worth. Griffin had represented a type of Black entertainer who made white executives comfortable, funny, unpredictable, but ultimately easy to dismiss. Malcolm was the opposite: professional, demanding, and unwilling to tolerate disrespect. He didn't play the fool, and that made him dangerous. Years later, their differences would become even more obvious. Malcolm spent his final years calling out Trump supporters, systemic racism, and the exploitation of Black artists. Eddie Griffin, on the other hand, evolved into exactly what Malcolm had warned about: a Black celebrity who supported Trump, made inflammatory statements, and catered to conservative audiences who found his act entertaining but never threatening. The contrast was glaring. Even during Malcolm and Eddie, the network had tried to slowly replace Black actors with white characters. Malcolm pushed back. He fought for Karen Molina White, the actress he was dating at the time. But Griffin's unprofessionalism gave executives the excuse they needed to justify the changes. Malcolm lost control of his own show and never forgot it. That early conflict became Malcolm's blueprint. He never again let someone else's recklessness sabotage his future. From that point forward, every relationship he entered professionally or personally was filtered through that lesson, and it showed. As his career progressed, Malcolm became increasingly selective, not because he was arrogant, but because he'd seen first, and how much damage one bad collaborator could cause. So when the funeral was planned, Eddie Griffin wasn't welcome. Not because of a grudge, but because Griffin represented a pattern, the kind of entertainer who cost Malcolm peace, power, and millions. That bridge had burned long ago, and Malcolm never rebuilt it. That wasn't the only exclusion. By 2024, Malcolm had launched his podcast, Not All Hood. What began as a platform for honest conversations about Black identity soon became something more radical, a declaration of war on the industry's hypocrisy. He didn't pull punches, he named names, he even said, there should be a moratorium on certain words in hip-hop. It's just so easy, everybody does it, it's corny. He wasn't just criticizing the art, he was criticizing the artists. One name in particular shocked people. J. Cole. Malcolm had admired him, but he said, I had to stop listening to J. Cole. I got tired of hearing. And that sentence said it all. For Malcolm, it wasn't about personal dislike. It was about artistic responsibility. He believed hip-hop had been weaponized, used by the industry to promote hate and glorify negativity, and he expected more from artists like Cole, who had the talent and platform to do better. The backlash was swift. Hip-hop fans accused him of sounding like a bitter elder trying to censor the next generation. J. Cole never responded, and that silence spoke volumes. In a culture where public callouts are usually met with immediate clapbacks, ignoring Malcolm was a strategic dismissal. But Malcolm had made his choice. Just like with Eddie Griffin, he was willing to burn bridges for his principles. He believed artists with massive influence had a duty to their communities, and if they failed to meet that duty, they deserved to be challenged. So when Malcolm died, the silence from hip-hop circles was deafening. There were no tributes from the artists he had criticized, no statements, no acknowledgments. J. Cole said nothing, and he wouldn't be invited to the funeral either. Malcolm-Jamal Warner had spent his entire career trying to elevate the image of Black men in media. He didn't want to be famous for the sake of fame. He wanted his roles, his interviews, his very presence to mean something. But that came at a cost, and now, even in death, that cost was still being paid. His wife understood that better than anyone. That's why when it came time to plan the funeral, it wasn't just about who loved Malcolm. It was about who truly respected him, who stood by him when it wasn't convenient, and who didn't profit off of his silence. One of the biggest names left off the guest list was, surprisingly, his former co-star from The Cosby Show, Lisa Bonet. Their on-screen sibling relationship had been iconic. Viewers loved their chemistry, the back and forth, the authentic bond that seemed to jump off the screen. But off-screen, their relationship had cooled slowly, silently, and for reasons few ever discussed publicly. Malcolm never spoke badly of Lisa. He was too respectful, too careful, but those close to him knew that when the show ended, so did their closeness. While Malcolm stayed committed to projects that uplifted the Black community, Lisa took a different path, distancing herself from the Cosby Show brand, Hollywood circles, and, for a time, even the entertainment industry altogether. There was no public falling out, just absence, and sometimes, absence speaks louder than conflict. It was not just about personal distance, either. It was about alignment or lack thereof. Malcolm continued to show up for events tied to the show, supported cast reunions, and honored the legacy of a program that, despite controversy, had opened doors for generations of Black actors. Lisa, on the other hand, had chosen to remove herself from that narrative entirely. And for Malcolm, that decision had meaning. Silence, to him, wasn't neutral. It was a choice, and when it came to honoring legacy, he believed silence could be betrayal. So when the funeral plans began, her name never came up, not because of bitterness, but because the connection just wasn't there anymore. There were other names too, people the public assumed would be present. But Malcolm's wife wasn't making decisions based on assumptions. She was making them based on truth, Malcolm's truth. He had once said, "You can't be pro-black and not support black women. You can't be pro-black and not protect black children." That was the standard he lived by. And anyone who didn't meet it, regardless of their fame or connection to him, was not getting a seat at the table. One figure whose absence drew particular attention was Phylicia Rashad, the actress who played Claire Huxtable, Malcolm's on-screen mother. Their bond had been strong during filming. She mentored him, guided him, and when the show ended, she spoke often about how proud she was of the young man he had become. But in recent years, that closeness had faded. Some believe it was because of their differing reactions to the controversy surrounding Bill Cosby. While Phylicia had publicly defended Cosby, calling him innocent until proven guilty, and expressing unwavering support, Malcolm had taken a more complicated, nuanced stance. He never condemned Cosby outright, but he also never defended him. Instead, Malcolm focused on the impact the scandal had on the cast and on the legacy of the show itself. He made it clear he was hurt by the erasure of something that had meant so much to so many people, and hurt that the actors were being punished for something they had no control over. That difference in response created quiet tension between him and some of his former co-stars. And Malcolm, who was never one to fake closeness, simply let those relationships fade. When his wife made the guest list, she didn't include people based on old titles or public perception. She included those who had been present in spirit, in support, and in truth. And some names didn't meet that test. Malcolm's funeral wasn't just a ceremony. It was a statement, a line drawn between performative grief and real love, between public personas and private loyalty, between those who stood for him and those who merely stood beside him. His wife wasn't being petty. She was being protective of his legacy, of his pain, of the years he spent feeling unseen, unsupported, and unprotected by the very community he worked so hard to uplift. She knew the industry had failed him, so she wasn't going to let it pretend to honor him now. The funeral was small, intimate, and intentional. No cameras, no publicists, no hashtags, just the people who had shown up for him when it mattered, not when it was convenient. Among those in attendance were several lesser-known friends and collaborators, artists, writers, activists, people whose names never trended, but whose presence had carried Malcolm through some of his most difficult seasons. One guest spoke privately about what the ceremony felt like. It was honest, that's the best word for it. It wasn't about making people cry on cue, it was about truth, and Malcolm would have loved that. That's what made this farewell so powerful. It wasn't for headlines, it wasn't for the industry, it was for him. Even in death, Malcolm's life reminded everyone that fame is not the same as love, and that public affection is no substitute for private respect. As the small circle of real friends and family gathered to honor Malcolm-Jamal Warner, there was one message that echoed louder than any eulogy. This wasn't just a death, it was a reckoning with the way Hollywood treats black artists, a reckoning with the silence that follows their trauma, a reckoning with the fact that, too often, the people who build legacies are the same ones denied the right to protect them. Malcolm had always been aware of the cost of telling the truth. In his final podcast episode, released just days before his death, he didn't mince words. He questioned the very structure of the entertainment industry, called out toxic cycles in music and television, and asked his listeners to look beyond the narratives they had been sold. He said, "When we're told who we are by the people who benefit from us staying in one place, we lose ourselves." That wasn't just a critique, that was a warning, a plea, and now, with his death, it feels prophetic. His wife's decision to limit the funeral to those who truly supported him wasn't about exclusion. It was about honesty. She wanted the people in that room to reflect Malcolm's truth, not just his fame. She didn't need cameras there to make it real. She didn't need celebrities posting tributes hours after ignoring him for years. She needed peace, and she gave Malcolm the peace he had fought for all his life. It wasn't easy. Turning away big names came with backlash. Quiet calls from agents, managers, even publicists trying to negotiate appearances, just for a few minutes. But she said no, every time, because Malcolm didn't need their performance. He needed their presence, and when he was alive, many of them were absent. Some fans expressed confusion online. Why wasn't it public? Why didn't they live stream it? Why wasn't this person invited? The answer was simple: Malcolm wouldn't have wanted it. He had spent years retreating from the spotlight, not because he didn't appreciate recognition, but because he had learned how dangerous visibility could be when it wasn't earned. He once said, "Fame is a mirror. It reflects whatever you put into it. If you don't know who you are, it'll turn you into something else." That line stayed with the people who loved him. They knew that protecting his legacy meant protecting the version of himself that most fans never saw: the quiet man who meditated, mentored young artists, questioned every system, and believed deeply in the healing power of truth. One guest shared a quiet moment from the ceremony. No cameras, no speeches. Just a song Malcolm loved, Nina Simone's "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free," playing softly in the background while everyone stood in silence. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't viral, it was sacred, and in that stillness they felt him. Not the actor, not the character, not the celebrity, the man, the husband, the friend, the protector, the truth teller. In the days that followed, those who weren't invited were quick to distance themselves. Some posted cryptic messages, others offered rehearsed condolences. But the silence that had once surrounded Malcolm, the silence he called out so many times, now became part of his legacy. Because silence speaks loudly, especially when it follows someone who spent their entire life refusing to be quiet. Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death may have taken him from us physically, but the words he left behind in his interviews, in his poetry, in his podcast are louder now than ever. And his wife made sure those words wouldn't be drowned out by the noise of celebrity grief. She honored him by protecting him one final time, not just from the media, not just from the industry, but from the same cycle of empty praise and shallow remembrance that claims so many Black voices after they're gone. This was not a story about bitterness. It was a story about boundaries. It was about refusing to let a man who lived with integrity be remembered through a lens of performance. It was about giving him back his story in full. The funeral ended the same way Malcolm lived, quietly, thoughtfully, and on his own terms. And for those who loved him, really loved him, that was more than enough.